Are you wanting your landscapes, your panoramas, your big picture, big view drawings to look more real? Then this is, I think, going to be a great video, a great drawing demo to watch as I explain in real time. So you're watching me draw this in the actual time it took me to draw it. And that includes the gaps, the thinking, the strategizing, because that's all an important part of understanding how we produce a drawing. Now, with a panorama, with a landscape, in most cases, the most important thing to capture, if we want it to look real, is a sense of the depth, the distance, the scope. It's usually a vast scene, and therefore the depths of plane, the places where we get a sense of moving inwards into the scene. In this case, we move inwards to the fence, and then we move inwards further back to those bushes that are a bit closer. Then we move further back to the village rooftops, and then we move further back again to the headland in the far distance. Each of these, in my thinking, is a depth of plane that these become really important in our strategizing, in our thinking, because it's by getting a sense of each of these, if you like, levels, moving further back from the one in front, that will give a sense of we're looking deep into the distance, rather than looking at a flat sheet of two-dimensional paper, where in fact every part of this scene is the same distance from our eyes as every other, and not a very great distance as well. But we want to try and capture in our marks, well, not so much capture, but to create the effect that each of these depths moving back is further than the one in front, and even many kilometers further than the one in front. And it's all to do with controlling the marks we make and choosing the marks we make. So watch this, and especially at the end when I do those final marks, the furthest things, because they're the ones that I think often are done less well. And what that does is it makes the things that are meant to be very far away feel a lot closer, and we lose the depth. And it's by that moment in the drawing process, usually only a couple of minutes towards the end, that can make all the difference to this sense of vast view or not. However, as is the case with pretty much every drawing I do, the slowest part is the first part, because I have a blank sheet of paper, and part of a realistic drawing is often an accurate drawing. And in this case, we've got this gate, double gate, and some fencing up close. So I wanted to feel close, so I wanted to have a heavier line, a heavier look, a more detailed view, because all of these things help our brain to think, this is closer, I see it more clearly, I see the colors more deeply, I see the values, the lights and darks more strongly. And I also need the perspective to be correct as well, because nothing says, this doesn't look real, quite as much as perspective that isn't correct. So eye level is up very high. In fact, it's probably above that far horizon line. It would be at sea level if we could see the sea level through the ridge line there across the bay. So that means that all of my lines, horizontal-ish lines, are actually going to be below eye level. And so as they move down the page, the angle will increase. However, my planes of horizontal lines here aren't all in 180 degrees. They're not all in a straight line. Even the two gates actually bend slightly towards me in the middle, although I've conveniently not worried about that in my drawing. I've made it look as though they do line up exactly. But the fencing angles are all different directions. And so what I do in this case is I just pay careful attention to what I'm seeing, and I seek to draw that as accurately as possible. Now, as you can see on the barrel of my pen, I'm using a 0.3 Copic multiliner, but I will switch to a 0.2 and then a 0.1. And by doing that, I'm able to get a lighter touch, a lighter feel, a lighter effect, which works well with creating the feel, the effect of what I'm drawing, looking further back, when I combine it with a simplified drawing style as well. Because I'm going to do more detail with the things closer, which is another reason why this first part of the drawing is slower, because I am trying to see more detail and draw more detail. And I'll also be doing stronger contrast as well for my shadows closer. And this is also a great exercise to do, this particular scene, if you're wanting to explore finding different marks for different foliage. With so much greenery here, so many leaves, at a bit of a mid-distance, we kind of get a sense of the leaves, but we don't particularly see the leaves in a great deal of detail. And it's very easy, if we draw everything the same, that we end up not seeing any distinction from one bush to another. So watch when I do these bushes, if foliage can be a problem, if doing shrubs, if creating distinction within masses of foliage is an issue, because it's all about the marks we use. Choosing different marks for different bushes, perhaps different values for different bushes. One of the advantages the camera has is it captures different color, which sometimes is what, when we see a scene, we most readily rely on to tell us that this is a different bush to this. But of course, everything I'm drawing is going to be black ink on white paper, so I can't use color, and therefore I have to interpret my scene differently. It's a mistake to think that when I draw a picture such as this, I am seeking to copy it. Now, that may not be a bad way of understanding some parts of it, particularly these closest, simpler forms, more geometric forms. But in my experience, it's generally a very, very poor understanding of what I'm doing. I like to think that when I draw a scene such as this, I'm translating a photographic language into a black pen language. And the letters and the words that I have, sometimes with my pen, will approximate fairly closely what's happening in the photographic language. But at other times, to say the same thing, I'm going to have to use totally different words and sounds in the new language. And so that, I think, a great way of describing what happens when I'm trying to draw the effect of detail rather than actually draw the detail that we have. And in this scene, the detail in these shrubs in the midground is so tiny that we can feel like we're seeing the individual leaves, but we're probably not. And so I need to try and capture the feel, the effect, and I'm going to rely on hatching and silhouette edges a lot in that. So I think that's going to be very helpful to see as well. In the meantime, I'm still plodding through these gates. The important thing with this gate work, fence work that I'm doing, is particularly to try and get the horizontal proportions as accurate as I can. Where I have the different fencing elements start and finish, or where the center of the gates are. And that's because I'm going to use those to help me align the midground. So when I come to, say, place those village roofs, I'm going to draw a line down from where the top of the roofs are and see where it lines up with the various elements of the gates and the posts. So sorry about this jumping. I was using an old camera stand, and unfortunately when I shook the table, even just very slightly by moving my hand, it set up this wobble going through the whole tripod thing. So I don't use it anymore, but I do apologize. It is at times distracting, or sometimes I just bump the table and that really sets off an earthquake. But I use the details going across the page with my fencing to line up things above it, firstly in my photo, and then I find that place in my drawing. But I don't do it slavishly, because sometimes I realize that my horizontal spacing in the first thing I've drawn actually isn't accurate. That there's too large a gap somewhere or not enough gap somewhere else. And then I make adjustments. But even when I don't get it exactly right in my drawing, and I can work that out, I can still use that now to help realign things in the best way for my drawing to look at the end. And you can see now on the right hand side where I've started to do some marks to indicate the foliage. And have I switched? Yes, I've now come down to a 0.2 millimeter pen. So now I want a bit of a lighter feel. The only foliage I've done with the thicker pen was that little clump to the right. I probably just forgot at that point to change pens. And you can see how I'm aligning with what I'm already doing. To get where the top of that path is, I'm looking to see where it lines up, this time horizontally rather than vertically in the photo with the post, the right-hand post of the gate. And I'm using that to help me get a sense of where I'm going and what I'm doing with it. So there's a bit more fencing that we can see through this gate and some shrubs. Now, value, lights and darks, are a great way of emphasizing shape and form through contrast. And that's what I'm doing here now. I'm choosing to move away from what we're seeing in the photo by letting the railing here of the fence in this part appear lighter, and therefore I can darken the shrubs that we see through it in the top right corner there, and that accentuates the shape of the gate. And by having some of the gate visible through positive space, by actually emphasizing the shape of the timber, the strips of timber, but in other parts of the gate, I emphasize the shape of the gate by darkening what we see through it. Visually, it simply creates a much more interesting effect. If you look at the photo there, we can see that the upper right corner, the values, the amount of darkness in the colors of the green and the colors of the brown of the fencing actually get quite close, which means that corner is not as clear to see as when the difference between the dark timber and the light, say, roadway behind it, where that difference is very strong and we very clearly see the pattern of the fence, of the gate. So what I'm doing is I'm adjusting what we see through the gate in that upper right corner to strengthen the appearance of the gate. So we need to think as much about spaces as we do the gaps between objects as we do about the objects themselves. So with these shrubs here, I'm trying to create them by drawing the shadows they cast. And I'm also trying to make a little greater definition between the light and dark areas. I'm eliminating quite a bit of the mid-range values, those middle greys, because I think if I do too much of that, it's all going to blur into one big blob in the middle of my drawing, which is not what I want. I do want the sense. So I'm emphasizing that the tops of all of these rounded shrubs in the center that are catching the light coming down from the upper right direction. Well, actually, no, it's more just the upper direction. I'm emphasizing the light to help bring clarity into my scene. And again, this is why we need to look at our photo beforehand or the scene in front of us and think, okay, what will be the challenges for making it clear what's what and how close or far away it is. And so that's what I'm doing at this point. And I'm also paying attention particularly to the edges, to the silhouettes. And I'm not really drawing the upper edge of these center bushes, but I'm going to define them by the shadows of the bushes further back that look to be above them from this angle. But now you can see that on the right-hand side, I'm doing the same thing to accentuate the bit of fence in there, where there is a bit of a turnstile effect to get in without having to open the car gates, the road gates. I'm also simplifying what we're seeing through there. There are some seats there for people to sit and admire the view, but I felt like it was going to be simply too cluttered. And also I like the feel of taking away the human habitation at this point to just strengthen the feel of nature. That we're more an observer of this natural view rather than a participant in it. And so now I'm defining the upper edge of these shrubs, these bushes on the right hand side. And look at the fairly non-committal marks I make, because maybe they're not going to quite be in the right place. Maybe I'm going to want to push them a little bit higher. And so I want to do marks that can get lost in more marks coming over the top if I want to just change what I'm doing and where I'm doing it. I like to place marks that keep my options open as I understand more clearly, or in more detail, more accurately, where placings should be as I progress the drawing. Of course, I'm drawing this freehand in ink. There is no pencil except a rough pencil outline to delineate the outer edge of where I want the drawing to be for the video. I could also have put low adhesive tape around those edges as well, of course, to get a nice neat finish, if that's what we're wanting, which I did. It also helps me keep the drawing image in camera view. So you can see now I'm taking a little more effort with the silhouette of these shrubs at the top, where these tall spears of some sort of spiky, leafy, maybe there are little flowers in there as well. This was summer, so a lot of summer plants were flowering. And again, I'm taking the opportunity to emphasize in my drawing these tall, spiky bits. It's not quite as strongly contrasted in the photo, but again, this is where to create clarity to help the brain of anyone looking at this drawing to understand what's happening. Changes that I'm making to make that as easy as possible. I have a playlist on drawing foliage that looks at all sorts of foliage scenarios from all sorts of trees, deciduous trees, evergreen trees, different types of palms and firs and spruces and pines and low-level shrubby plants, garden beds, grass, flowers. I have a lot of videos on these if you want to check out that playlist. Even if plants aren't themselves the main thing we want to draw or the focus of our drawing, even in the urban landscape, they come up so often as street plantings of trees or pot plants in window boxes and the like. So it's always a shame when I look at a drawing and the architecture, the urban landscape elements have been so well done, but the foliage lets it down. It almost looks like an afterthought. We really want to work on being able to capture in some credible way with our marks every element that we're going to find in our subjects. I also have a playlist on drawing the effect of detail, which is the drawing technique which really is the backbone of my drawing, that I've been using the language of in this voiceover. And it's really how I think, and therefore how I'm able to draw any scene of complex detail, whether it's, in this case, leaves and shrubs, or whether it's grass. But it's not just natural subjects, it also includes architecture, where because of the angle perhaps that we're viewing a complex facade, it just becomes too detailed to separate lines, how we draw the effect of that architecture drifting off into the distance, or it might be incredibly ornate architectural decoration of an interior of a grand imperial or civic building. How we can find marks and create the effect of all of that detail without actually trying to draw the detail, because the irony is that when we try and draw all the detail, and even if we succeed in drawing all the detail, it actually can look less real than if we suggest the detail in certain ways through different drawing techniques. And it certainly takes a lot more time to draw all the detail, which makes it even more frustrating when it looks less real. So again, that's, I think, a very helpful playlist to find, and there are lots and lots of different examples of different subjects. Crowds of people, we can draw the effect of detail. Obviously leaves on a tree, all of these natural scenes, decoration, but things like gravel on the road, paving on roadways, all manner of things. So now we're establishing pretty much our mid-ground, and we're going to shift shortly into doing the I think of it as the further mid-ground, and I'm sure you'll see me change my pen in a moment from this 0.2 to a 0.1. I actually did this drawing a couple of years ago, but certainly that's what I would do if I were doing this now. So I've had a break there. I've obviously turned the camera on and off, and there is slightly less light coming through the window, but I have switched. I'm sure I just saw a 0.1 on the barrel. I have switched to a 0.1. So before I rush to start drawing, I'm just taking a little bit more time to reorient myself with the scene. And I'm also going to make some marks for the far side of the bay before I do that village. Now, look at how lightly I am dressed. That's a 0.1. Look at how lightly I'm trying to make the lightest marks I can. And I also don't want an even line. I want my line to get lighter and darker, and have a few little gaps even in places, because I feel that represents the curvature of the landscape and the dappled effect that the atmosphere gives of our perception of what we're seeing in the distance compared to the clarity that we see things closer up. Just imagine what I've drawn there. If I'd drawn a solid, continuous, fairly even line, the way I'd drawn some of the fencing or some of the foliage silhouettes in the foreground. It's not just that I'm using a thinner pen, I'm using it as lightly as I can. And one of the ways I do that is by holding the angle less. I'm not letting the pen sit as high above the paper. I'm really getting a very shallow angle with the nib. So shallow that sometimes I'm actually not leaving a mark on the paper. I would rather have gaps and do strokes that didn't actually ink the paper than have the pen too high and have ink come out at this place that is too heavy, because there's no erasing. Once it's on the paper, it's on the paper. And once I've done this furthest line work, I have to be really careful here now, because I'm adding some hatching for value, for the darker green value. It's not actually so much a different value as a different color. If we were to grayscale this, the difference between this bluey gray section on the end and the lighter green at this left-hand side wouldn't actually be that great. But I do want to create a little bit of distinction, of variation in the value that we see there, to help give the sense of there is some leaf cover on this far hill. I don't want it just to be an outline, because that will tend to make it feel two-dimensional. I do want this to feel like it is a rounded, well, not so much rounded, but it's not a strip of paper that's been cut out and just glued onto the background, that this has form. And so I want to create a sense of three-dimensional modeling with some hatch work somewhere. But at every moment, I've got to be so careful not to go too heavy, because that will make it feel closer. And I want this far side of Robin Hood Bay to really feel like it's the far side. Look, it's a beautiful little spot on the east coast of England. If you're ever there and you haven't been there, you have to park the cars up the top, and it's a steep walk down to the village, which is fine going down. It's fun to come back up, but hey, it keeps us young, doesn't it? Even when we're not. And so here I am. So again, you can see that I'm stopping, I'm pausing, I'm looking, I'm thinking more now, because it's not as straightforward. And now I'm going to do, what pen have I got? Have I still got the 0.1? Come on, Stephen, turn the barrel around. I'm sure we'll see it soon enough, but I'm sure I've still got the 0.1. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a little more firmly with it, because what I'm wanting now is the village part, the village rooftops, to feel closer than the far side of Robin Hood Bay, but not as close as what's in the foreground. At the end, of course, the end of every drawing, we should always make sure when we draw that we leave room. I don't mean physical room, but we leave the possibility of adjusting what we've drawn. When we've got the whole thing in place, we can see the range of values and marks and effects that we've created, and just tweak it to strengthen the effects that we want, or to minimize the impact of any effects, visual effects I mean, that we don't want. So we can't obviously make dark things lighter, but by making things around things that are a bit darker again, we can make the things that we're not darkening feel lighter. But we can only do that if we haven't already gone over dark too quickly at the start. And so at the end, having those moments where we look at the whole scene that we've drawn and think, okay, what am I wanting to do here? How has it worked? Can I make adjustments now, perhaps in parts that were the first parts I drew? I find that's important. So I'm doing this village now fairly lightly, because then I can make adjustments to it to make it a little darker if I want, if I feel that it's too light, if it feels too far away from the foreground. If I feel like it's looking too much somehow that it's on the far side of the bay. So it's keeping our options open. And I want to suggest the architectural detail, but I really don't want to draw very much of it at all. I don't want to try and draw it at all. Just to create the feel of the architecture. So, less is more at this point, because we can always come back with those adjustments and draw a bit more. And look, please hit the like button if you're finding this interesting. Hit notifications for my channel. As I said at the start, you're watching this in real drawing time, and I do have a playlist of videos that are in real drawing time, or real-time drawing as I more commonly refer to it. So if you find that this is a helpful way to draw, to learn drawing, then you can find all of those videos of mine more easily, as opposed to it being doubled or even trebled or quadrupled in speed, particularly with these drawings that are a little more involved and take a little bit longer. But in my personal view, as a teacher, I think it's very, very hard to learn to do a skill if, when we see the skill being demonstrated, we're not actually seeing what takes place, because the timing is part of understanding what it is to learn that skill. And particularly, I think, and now I will sound like an old man, but particularly in a world, I think, where speed seems to be more and more important, where we want to be at the end before we've started, where we want the success before we've done the work, I just don't think it's helpful to watch drawing demos, even mine, where you're watching me draw it at twice or three times or four times my drawing speed, because it gives an unrealistic view of what the process is for me. It makes it look like I'm able to do this when I'm not. I'm not able to draw with this accuracy and creating the effects I create that fast, because it's the thinking, which is such an important part of the drawing process. It's the thinking that determines what I do. And if I don't allow time to think, if I don't have time in my mind to translate from what I'm seeing to the marks I'm putting on the paper, then I don't know what marks to put on the paper, and I'm just guessing. It's such a mistake to think that learning to draw is about learning somehow techniques that, oh, well, if you have a shrub, you draw it like this. If you have a tree, you draw it like this. No, there is no way to draw anything. It's always in this context, this type of tree, at this distance, in this light, that's surrounded by these other things that I do or don't want to or need to accentuate or make clear, or perhaps I want to merge them together, whatever. There is no one size fits anything. It's always the individual circumstances of the scene and of the drawing that we want to produce. It's our understanding of a drawing process. And of course, there's more than one drawing process. There's lots of ways to draw. I love the drawings of lots of people who don't draw anything like me, but this is the way I understand the drawing process of this translation of a photograph, into drawing. And so this is the marks I'm putting on the paper at every stage of this process come from my thinking, from my understanding, from my strategizing for how I'm wanting the drawing to look. And I often don't know myself half of this until I've started, because particularly in the second half of the drawing, I'm responding to what I've done, to the marks I've put on the paper in the first half of the drawing. It's always a wrestle of the mind before the ink hits the paper. And when we see sped up demos, or demos where we only go from snippet to snippet, all highly edited, of the drawing process for that particular drawing, we do not get a sense, we do not get that understanding of what's being asked of me, or what I'm asking of myself when I start to draw. And that can lead us to think that drawing is a faster, easier process than it really is. And then we set ourselves up to fail, to not produce the drawings that we can imagine in our head. And we put it down to, I don't know, some ridiculous notion of not having talent or anything, when really the problem is we haven't fully understood what we were taking on board. We haven't fully understood the challenge that we were facing. And therefore we weren't prepared for it. It's not that we can't. It's just that we didn't know what we didn't know. So I hope all these ramblings make some sense to some of you. You know, my first drawing didn't look like this, and I couldn't do it this quickly. And I hope that is actually encouraging for anyone who's thinking, how can you do it this quickly and have it look like this? Because it's not where I started. It's where I'm at now. And wherever you're at now, if you continue in a thoughtful and engaged way, will not be where you end up. But we need to keep our focus, our thinking, and how am I wanting my drawing to look at the end? I find now, and I couldn't have done this at the start, but I do find now that I'm more aware of the possibilities of how the way I draw can make a drawing look. I actually try and visualize in my head my finished drawing when I look at the photo. I try and picture how I think the drawing will look from all the marks I'm going to use. And in some ways, then I just get to copy the drawing in my head. Anyway, we're just about done here. I'm adding a few details in the immediate foreground, because that just brings the depth of plane closer. And if I bring the foreground closer, that actually makes the far distance even further away. So that's a great little technique to do, I think, a great little thing to remember. always do. In fact, I could have even, I mean, I didn't because it's not in the photo, but I could have done like a big a spray of just weedy, shrubby growth in the foreground that comes up very close and would have had the sense of really bringing the foreground closer, would have made that gate look, rather than the foreground, perhaps the start of the midground. It's a bit of a dramatic device. Can be overdone, but it can be very effective too. But, you know, here we have this scene of Robin Hood Bay, and I don't think I do this now, but if I was drawing this again, I would darken the gate, the lines I've done for the gate on the lower left section. I would just strengthen those a little bit with greater contrast. I'm Stephen Travers. I hope you found this helpful. Please hit that like button for me if you did. Why not subscribe to my channel, check out my playlist, whatever. But if you draw scenes such as this, I hope some of these thoughts, some of these techniques, some of these ways of thinking have been helpful and that you can put them into practice whatever you draw with and however long you take to do a drawing in a way that's going to advance your drawings in the direction you want. But in the end, whatever you draw, however you draw it, however it turns out, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.